Okay, well, welcome to the PSYOP video on Performance Management 2.0. Thanks for clicking on it and giving it a listen. We're going to talk about some of the big ideas behind Performance Management 2.0 and the paradigm shift that's going to be required for moving from what I call PM 1.0 to PM 2.0. So just some kind of context setting, the current state of PM. Overall, if you have followed any of this in the business press or in the academic press, you should be aware that it's fairly uniformly criticized as ineffective. Most people are unhappy with it. Employees are unhappy, supervisors are unhappy, compensation people are unhappy. Pretty much everybody does it the same way at the basic kind of strategic level. So at the beginning of the year, we set objectives. There's feedback throughout the year, and there's formal reviews, usually sometimes mid-year and end of year. And then people get rated, and there's reward distributions as a function of that. So that's what I call last generation performance management. I also call that kind of the game. I mean, we play a game with employees in this process. Employees work for ratings and rewards. That's the game. And so if you're like most companies, you change it every few years as the noise level rises with some immediate short-term improvement, but over the long term and the medium term and the long term, very little improvement. This is the nature of PM transformation and change over the last literally 50 years. Tactical change, very little long-term improvement. So it has to change. And there are, I would say, 5 reasons why it has to change. And the first is as we just talked about, is our practices. Our practices aren't effective. Employees and supervisors and everybody else gives them very low marks. And look at any benchmarking survey, very low marks, very low grades for how the fairness and accuracy and the validity and reliability, certainly of ratings and other of these practices. And many of these practices are unsupported by scientific research evidence. Ratings and money as a motivator, pay for performance, differentiation of rewards. There's just not much evidence to suggest these practices are effective in driving the outcomes we care about: individual performance, retention, organizational performance, and productivity. The second reason really has more to do with what I would call paradigms. So it's really the thinking behind our practices that are wrong. And this is probably one of the most important reasons, is that these practices are based on faulty logic and faulty assumptions and beliefs about how you motivate people. Roots in the classic theories that lots of people studied in school, that are behind a lot of the management training we get and our leaders are getting from psychology and from economics. Stimulus response psychology and classical economics and the role of money and motivators, labor economics, theories that lots of people haven't heard about, agency theory, tournament theory, that are behind a lot of the practices in HR, but also a lot of PM practices, competition, seeing employees as unmotivated and needing to be motivated extrinsically. And what's interesting is a lot of these theories were discredited, back in the 50s with stimulus response psychology and the cognitive revolution, and back in the 70s with Richard Thaler and behavioral economics, discrediting a lot of the principles of classical economics. So academic research moved on long time ago from these explanations of behavior. But no one told the business leaders or HR leaders. So HR is firmly, I think, stuck in the 50s when it comes to performance management rewards, and it's causing us problems. The third big issue for me is purpose. Performance management is really pointed at the wrong problem. The primary goal for performance management, independent of what anyone says and what organizations tell you, is rewards differentiation. It's very clear from benchmarking. It's very clear when you go to a business and you say, I think you should get rid of performance management. First thing they say is, how do I pay people? And this has been institutionalized since the 80s with the rise of pay for performance. And pay for performance really co-opted PM as a reward, as a performance measure. And so, PM became a means to an end rather than an end in itself. And that just doesn't fit contemporary views now of how you motivate people and also how PM fits into organization design. We'll say more about that in a minute. The other major problem is the, I call it propaganda. So we're looking for guidance in a lot of the wrong places, and it's not easy to change. In fact, it's fairly hard to change. So we're looking for guidance mostly from benchmarking. Consultants and HR think tanks do these big benchmarking surveys, and they steer us toward common practices, not effective practices. And so scientific evidence doesn't enter into the equation. It's hard to access. People don't understand it. They don't read it. And consultants aren't, and HR think tanks aren't promoting the rigorous scientific evidence. And change is hard. I mean, there's no question. Even if organizations wanted to change this process, it's hard. This process is tied to everything. Everything is tied to ratings. And if you've implemented big technology, it's hard to change. So technology can handcuff you. And we behave very, at some point after years of trying to change this process, we have become very fatalistic. Nothing has worked. It becomes almost an unsolvable problem. You can't please everybody. And so we rationalize and we stay with the status quo. Everybody does it this way anyway. It's just HR stuff. It's not that important. So let's not worry too much about it. We can deal with the noise. It's not fatal. We're not going out of business because of this. So we just endure it. And then the last major important reason for me for change has to do with the future. So you can complain all you want about scientific evidence and the purpose and propaganda, but I think it's clear from the future of organizations and the future of work that the future is not going to support PM 1.0. We're going to need different practices in the future. PM 1.0 requires specialized, simple jobs, routine jobs with stable responsibilities over at least a 1-year period where you can measure performance quantitatively. And it requires that you own the people that work for you, that work on the work that's important to you. And that you have, fairly small spans of control that you can manage all these people. And the future, it's not going to be like that. I mean, the work is more complex. All the simple jobs have been outsourced or automated, and that will continue. And jobs are specialized. We're dealing with much more uncertain environments, flatter organizations, larger spans of control, more teams, and most of the people that are working on your work you don't own. They're gig workers, they're contract workers, they're fixed duration employees, they're partners. These work arrangements are not going to allow you to implement these standard ways of managing people and rewarding people. And half the people you don't even see, they're not even around that you have, they're remote. So we need to change, but what do we change to? And so I'll talk about PM 2.0, which is short for next generation performance management. And the key is to follow the science. If you follow the science, the rigorous academic research and science, then and follow those practices, essentially what I would list kind of 5 big ideas behind PM 2.0. So big idea number 1, new purpose. So PM becomes more about performance, ensuring individual and organizational performance has much less to do with evaluation, differentiation, and distribution of rewards. So the PM 2.0 is focused on direction, alignment, and meaning and purpose. So it's a meaning and purpose producing process and getting people aligned to the organization priorities. And it's a management process. It's focused on decision making. What do we focus on? What don't we focus on? It directs the organization, directs employees, and it's about strategy implementation. How do we translate strategy, organizational pursuits into meaningful work, day to day for employees? And it creates, the idea is that it creates purpose and meaning for employees, in addition to direction and alignment, and connecting employees to the bigger, meaningful organizational pursuits. What are we doing for our customers? What are we doing for society? and using that to motivate people instead of carrots and sticks and threats and whips. Big idea number two is really about goals. It puts PM 2.0 has goals at the center of the process. They're not peripheral or more tangential. The PM 2.0, I think, changes the motivational frame for leaders, for organizations, from an extrinsic frame that says, if you make it worth their while, employees will work hard, versus, an intrinsic frame, which is more, if you give employees something important to work for, they will work for it, they'll work hard for those goals and objectives. And the science around goals and goal setting is virtually bulletproof. It's as bulletproof as we get in organizational psychology. No question, goals work. Goals direct, they energize, they get people to persist, they require people to think and strategize about how they're going to accomplish them. And they work because they provide a link to what's important to the organization and what's important to the employee, not because they're contractual and they're consequences that are hanging in the balance of satisfying and meeting these goals. This is not surprising. This goes back to the 60s and the 70s with the work of Ed Lawler and Richard Hackman, and job characteristics, reaction to Taylorism and the compartmentalizing and specialization of work, is that those jobs are not that interesting. People don't want to do these simple jobs. And so we've known for quite a long time that meaning is important, but a lot more writing about it, purpose and meaning, and the importance of meaning at work today. And that purpose and meaning are associated with things we care about, like engagement, well-being, performance, and if people who don't have those things end up with less engaged, poor performers, and overall kind of lower levels of well-being. So big idea number three is more of a focus on what I would call progress instead of feedback, and positivity. So progress toward goals is more important for motivating people than achieving goals. And the research is fairly clear on this. It's interesting. A lot of this is in affect, kind of research in affect theory and emotions, but it's very clear that a sense of progress toward goals mediates the effects of the experience, the day-to-day experiences employees have, and how they feel about those experiences. So circumstances, day-to-day circumstances that employees experience at work that facilitate progress lead to positive affect, and experiences that block progress lead to negative affect. Affect, especially positive affect, is critically important, because over time this builds up and creates the things that we care about, like engagement, well-being, and performance. And so the foundation of PM 2.0 is goals and progress motivate, not feedback. Now, it's not that I don't care about feedback or that feedback's not important. It's the perspective that progress has, because progress keeps goals in the forefront. Feedback gets in trouble when it gets disconnected from goals. Feedback has a fairly checkered history in terms of improving performance. It gets disconnected from goals. It tends to be negative. Those of us who've practiced in organizations for years now, I think understand that feedback has become much more synonymous now with information or signals or messages about future performance ratings. And instead of, day-to-day feedback about what I need to get my work done. Now, negative feedback has its place. It's very potent, should be used more sparingly, mostly for more prevention-oriented kinds of goals, compliance goals, safety goals, things like that. And, this focus on positivity and progress is kind of, it's hard to hear for traditional business leaders and supervisors who are, whose job is, they feel is to jerk knots in people's tails, right? It's to correct them when they're wrong. It's to get them back on track. And, I think that there's research, I think it's by Jack Zenger and Joel Folkman, that supervisors feel they're doing a better job when they're negative. So it's not surprising that this doesn't come as second nature to supervisors who be positive. But that's what the research is clear, clearly shows that people do better, not just at work, outside of work, when there's a higher ratio of positive experience, positive feedback, positive interventions to negative. Researchers call that a kind of a positive offset. So a positive offset is better for performance, better for well-being, better for human functioning in general. I love Teresa Amabili's tagline from her book, The Progress Principle. So the objective for me, for PM, is progress in meaningful work every day. So PM really becomes progress management, day to day, facilitating good moments, good days, minimizing as much as we can bad moments, bad days. And this is very much I think to use a U.S. Football metaphor, a move the change mindset. So day-to-day progress, get first downs, move the chains, every day. Let's make progress toward goals that are meaningful for me as an employee and us as an organization, which changes the role of supervisors, I think, in a good way. It gives them a different perspective that it's not that your job is to give people feedback, it's to make sure they make progress. So your role day to day is to support employees in and helping them make progress against their goals, because their goals are very likely your goals. So big idea number 4, PM 2.0 becomes a team sport, not an individual sport. And it's very clear that PM 1.0 is designed for individuals. Organizations are meritocracies. No debate about that. And in a meritocracy, individual performance is what's celebrated and rewarded. But again, work is more and more being done in teams. And increasingly, there is a premium being put on competencies like cooperation, collaboration, both cooperation, collaboration inside the organization, but also cooperation, collaboration outside the organization, partners and vendors and outside people outside the people that you're dependent on to get work done. And if you follow the organization design literature, agile and design thinking, it's very clear that teams and informal networks are becoming critical for success in organizations. So teams and informal networks are the way that we're going to be designing organizations for the future. And so we need to design PM 2.0 for teams. So teams set objectives, set team objectives, individual objectives in the context of team objectives, team feedback, team development, team rewards, importantly, team and organizational rewards, and fewer, individual rewards. And part of this just capitalizes on the idea that people are social. People have a need to belong, and I think we're smart to use PM to leverage that need. But unfortunately, again, organizations are meritocracies. The talent myth is alive and well in organizations. We love top talent. We love our high potentials, and we spend a lot of energy, a lot of money, a lot of time paying attention to them. But it's clear, again, from research that performance has a lot less to do with individual talent and ability than we would like to admit, especially those of us who are organizational psychologists who spend our time, trying to predict performance and trying to measure performance and talent. That we don't like to admit as much that luck, the system, other people are as strong, if not stronger, determinants of how people perform. As their own individual talent and ability and effort. And in general, I think, again, the science, I think, would support this, that teams in the kind of work that we do in organizations every day, now and even more in the future, teams do better. Complex work that's more knowledge-based work where there's no right answers. And in general, in that kind of work, teams do a better job than individuals. So teams. So big idea number 5. This is probably the hardest to accept. Is that, and it's easy when I talk to organizations about Okay, here's what we need. You need to focus PM on alignment and direction. We need to put goals at the center, focus more on goals and the meaning and purpose they create, focus more on progress, be more positive, and focus more on teams. You have them, they're there. They can get behind that. But the difficulty comes when you tell them, oh, and by the way, you're going to have to give up all of the PM 1.0 practices. You're going to have to give up ratings and quantitative evaluations of performance. You're going to have to give up individual pay for performance programs, or you're going to have to minimize them. And you're going to have to give up the more kind of mercenary, radical competition and differentiation rewards. That's where they dig their heels in, they dig their claws in, and you drag them kicking and screaming away from these practices. And again, the research is clear. These practices are not the be-all, end-all in motivating employees to work hard. And they're not aligned with the way we're going to have to work in the future. But getting rid of these practices is hard. Nobody knows that better than I do. And nobody knows that better than those of you who have tried to reform these practices in organizations. This is all we have ever known, is that money, pay for performance, contingent rewards is the bedrock of motivation for decades. And it's all business leaders have known as well. So big idea number 5, stop what we're doing right now. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And so it's clear that that in order to make this happen, we have to change people's thinking. Okay, people's paradigms, mental models have to change. We have to, and the fundamental change is this idea of separating these two different ideas, motivation from managing compensation. Okay, think about these two ideas as separate. And the trick is going to be to reinforce with leaders and HR professionals that you can do that. You can motivate without money. In fact, money's not a very strong motivator. A lot more. It's complicated, but in the end, money doesn't work that well to motivate day to day. And so it's to reassure leaders that you can motivate without money, and you can manage compensation without differentiation and pay for performance. And you can make all those decisions that you used to make with ratings without them. In fact, you could probably make them better. And so, the motivating without money is easy. This is, decades of research on the importance of these more powerful motives for getting people to show up and to work hard. Purpose and meaning, progress and positivity, belonging, autonomy, mastery and competence. This is classic Edward Deci, ideas that were popularized by Dan Pink in his book Drive. These things, have decades of support from job design and motivation research. So we need to tap those motives, and PM is I think perfectly configured, perfectly designed to leverage those motives. Now, the manage without compensation part, that's not that hard either. A lot of companies are doing these things, but they're not putting they're not the central kind of planks in their total reward strategy. So, the key for managing compensation in the future is going to be, 3 or 4 things. It's pay people well, grow their pay, share the wealth, and it's leverage other, non-financial rewards. So pay people well is pay them well against the market. And the people that you're in love with, high post, top talent, pay them above market. Okay, focus on base pay. Grow people's pay. So cost of living adjustments, market-based pay increases, go back to narrow banding and narrow job structures and promote people more often. There are ways of increasing people's pay without, dumping bonuses and merit increases in their lap when they don't really motivate people that much. Share the wealth, implement more organizational reward structures, organizational incentive systems like profit sharing, gain sharing, and stock ownership programs, things like that. A lot of companies do this stuff, but it's not a key part of their compensation strategy. And these things, there's lots of research on these programs. They work. Companies that implement these kind of programs perform better, more productive over time. And you don't have all the nagging, annoying, dysfunctional, unforeseen consequences that come from these programs, like we see with traditional individual pay for performance programs, where you get all kinds of shenanigans that as people learn to play the game. And then, lots of, that we should also focus on a lot of the non-financial rewards. And companies are doing these things, recognition programs, investing in training and development and learning and development, but they're not really committed to these. They would rather have more money. But in the future, I think these are actual, motivators for people. People want to grow, they want to develop, they want to become more competent. So this is the big shift that's going to happen, is separating motivation from managing compensation. So thanks for listening. Feel free to contact me if you want to talk more about this. You can get me in all the usual places, on LinkedIn and email, Twitter. And I wrote a book about all this stuff, lots more detail in that book. And I've written several articles that are available on LinkedIn and my own website that go beyond kind of the book, and also capture some of the newer ideas that, especially related to compensation. And then some videos as well, and you can find those on YouTube. So thanks for listening, and I hope you found it helpful.